Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Now, guys, chapter number 2 of Guyton and Hall, Physiology, the cell and its functions. In the first paragraph, they are simply saying that there are trillions of cells in the body, and these cells can survive, and they can survive for years and months if we provide them with proper environment and proper nutrients. These can survive, and these cells are the building blocks, building material, or building blocks of an every organisms which is multicellular, and these cells contain genetic material and carry out the metabolic functions of the cells. Now, organization of the cell, how the cell is organized, the cell is the main components of the cells. The main components of the cells are the nucleus and cytoplasm. The nucleus and cytoplasm, which is surrounded by the cell membrane or plasma membrane. So the substances which make up the cells, these are called protoplasm. Protoplasm has five important components, which are water, ions, proteins, lipids, and carbohydrates. We will discuss one by one. Water. In an average, the cells contain 70% to 85% of water, and this water is necessary for the normal functions of the cell. For example, there are many enzymes and proteins which requires water for its dissolution and its for normal function. If there is no water, there will be no medium for the metabolic machinery and metabolic functions of the cell. Now, ions, through the ionic differences and through the ionic concentration, the different metabolism of the cells can occur normally. For example, there are enzymes and there are multiple proteinaceous enzymes which require ions for their activation. For example, if we take the example of prosthetic groups, magnesium, manganese, these ions are necessary for these enzyme. And further, the neurons which dependent entirely on the ions, the neurons carry out its entire functions through the ionic distribution. So the ionic components of a cell is very important. Now, proteins. Proteins is the second abundant component of a cell, which is consist of 10 to 20%, of the cell mass. Now, we have the proteins are classified. Protein, on the basis of structure, we have the globular and filamentous. On the basis of function, we have the functional and structure. So, cell membrane, the proteins which are present in the cell membrane, and in the membranous structures of other organelles in the cells, which for example include endoplasmic reticulum, the Golgi apparatus, the Lysosomes, the peroxisomes. Their membrane structures also consist of proteins. So this is the simple classification of proteins. Now we have the lipids. The lipids are, there are three types of lipids. They are phospholipids is the most abundant, and then phospholipid, cholesterol, and sphingolipids. They consist of 2% of the body mass. Phospholipids is very important. Phospholipid is the most abundant lipid in the cell, in the structure of the cell membrane. Is the most abundant is the phospholipid, and then cholesterol, and in concern of the lipids, the most abundant is the phospholipid, then cholesterol, and the sphingolipids is the is in less amount in these three lipids. So phospholipid acts as a barrier. Cholesterol act as a permeability controller. It controls that the cell membrane or the particular membrane will be permeable or impermeable to the substances. And sphingolipids is necessary for the prevention of the cells from the environmental harmful factors. Now, carbohydrate is also very important. Carbohydrate can be structural, or carbohydrate can be uses for energy metabolism, and carbohydrates can be stored for the future use. For example, through carbohydrate in the structures is present as a glycoprotein in the cell membrane, as a glycoprotein and glycolipids. Carbohydrate in the form of glucose, for example, is present in the blood and utilized by the all cells of the body for energy. And when the carbohydrate is in the form of glucose is increases, then it is stored in the liver and muscle. The liver stored it up to 6% of the carbohydrate as a glycogen, and the muscle store 3% as a glycogen, and on average 1% storage of the glucose occurs in the body. Now the cell structures. We will discuss the cell structures, the organelles, the membranous structures, and other components of the cells. The membranous structures of the cell. For example, the cell membrane is made up of lipid bilayer, proteins, and carbohydrate. And in this way, other organelles like endoplasmic reticulum, Golgi apparatus, lysosomes, mitochondria, peroxisome, these also contain the same lipid bilayer membrane which is present in the cell membrane. So these are the membranous structures of the cells. Now, cell membrane. The cell membrane is 7.5 to 10 nanometer thick. 7.5 to 10 nanometer thick. It consists of 55% protein, 25% phospholipids, 13% cholesterol, 4% other lipids, and 3% carbohydrate. So this is the distribution of different components which make up the cell membrane. The cell membrane lipid bilayer impedes penetration by water soluble substances. For example, if we take a look through this is the structure of the cell membrane. These are the proteins. This is the carbohydrate. These blue, reddish like structures. These are the carbohydrate. This is the protein, and this is the lipid bilayer. So I explained earlier that the cell membrane is made up of lipid bilayer. This is the lipid bilayer. This is the one layer of lipid, and this is another layer of lipid. And these are the tails. This is the head of these molecules, and these are the tails. And between them is present cholesterol and sphingolipids. This is the structure of the lipids. How the lipids are organized, I will draw this on this to make you understand, guys. For example, if I take the glycerol, one molecule of lipid, if I take it, carbohydrate, 3 carbon, okay, OH, OH, and OH, H, hydrogen, hydrogen, and hydrogen. This is one glycerol. If it is if this is replaced by some phosphatic acid group, then it will become what? Phospholipids. Phospholipids. For example, if I convert it into the phosphate group, for example, let's draw it. This is the phosphate group, and this is the other organic group. This phosphate group, the head contain this phosphate group, and the tail is consist of this organic group. So it's arranged like this. So the head is water soluble, and the other component is water insoluble. And in this way they arranged. In this way they arrange this organic portion, because there is water outside the cell. Outside the cell is also water, and inside is also. So the head projects to the water side, and the tail projects to each other like this. So these, it's make a single layer of it's make a lipid bilayer, two layers of lipid molecules, and in between them are present cholesterol, and sphingolipids, etc. It's make up the lipid bilayer. Now if we come to the proteins, these are the proteins. The proteins are of two types. We have two types of protein in the cell membrane. The protein which traverses the entire length of the cell membrane, these are called the integral proteins. The proteins which is attached to the one side, to the outside, if a protein is attached to the outside or to the inside, this is called the peripheral protein. So this protein which traverses the entire length of the cell membrane, they are called integral protein, and the protein which is attached to one side of this integral protein, they are called peripheral proteins. And the carbohydrates, which may be attached to the lipids or which may be attached to the proteins is a glycolipids or glycoproteins. This is the structures. So the lipid bilayer, it's the lipids make up about 25% phospholipid, 13% cholesterol, 4% other lipids. We have the 55% proteins in the lipid in the cell membrane, and only 4% carbohydrate. This is the composition of the cell membrane. Now this the cell membrane is discussed. The cell membrane is in, the structure is also discussed. So one more thing, that what is the role of the complex sphingolipids? I told you before in the starting of this chapter in lipids, that the sphingolipid functions as to prevent the cell from the environmental factors, or it can also insulate the cell, and addition side for the extracellular fluid proteins. So this is the one point which should be noted. Integral and peripheral cell proteins. I told you that the integral, these are the integral cell protein, and this is the peripheral cell protein. So the integral cell protein, the peripheral cell protein function may be as an enzyme, or it may be act as a receptor. But the functions of the integral protein is diversified. How? For example, it can act as a channel proteins. For example, the aquaporins, which are the channel for water, the sodium channel, the potassium. For example, this is the cell membrane, and this is the protein. For example, this is the integral protein. So how can it will be act as a carrier protein? It will attach. For example, if this is the cell membrane, and this is the carrier protein. The carrier protein, if this is the molecule attaches, the molecule attached in the carrier protein will take up the molecule right over there to the cell. So the carrier protein acts as a cell. And I discussed the channel protein. For example, this is the channel protein, and it can be the integral protein can act as a receptor. For example, if this is a receptor, molecule, if we take the example of insulin receptor, if this is the insulin receptor, then the insulin will attach to this receptor, and this receptor will change the enzymatic machinery of the cell inside and will carry out the function. So the integral protein can act as a channel protein, can act as a carrier protein, can act as a receptors. So these are the functions of the carrier proteins. Now membrane carbohydrate, the cell glycocalyx. The cells which I have showed you before, that for example these are the carbohydrate which is attached to the proteins and lipids. Most of the carbohydrate is present as a glycoproteins, and glycolipid is in less amount. This extremely high community of carbohydrate outside the cell membrane, which is called glycocalyx, and this glycocalyx has negative charges and has its own properties. This glycocalyx, for example, has negative charges, which is discussed right over there. This glycocalyx has negative charges and repels other negatively charged molecules. This glycocalyx can also act as attachment and addition to the other cells. Through the gap junctions, they will attach the cells which are attached to the gap junctions. So in the intermediate thing between these two cells is the glycocalyx, through which the help of glycocalyx these two cells are attached to each other. Now receptors, glycocalyx can also act as a receptor molecule. For example, it can also act as a receptor molecule for those molecules which cannot cross the cell membrane and which are lipid insoluble. So the glycocalyx can act as a receptor for those, and they can also act as an immunity. This glycocalyx layer can also protect the cell from different changes in concern of chemicals or pathogens, etc. So the four main functions are repelling, attachment, and receptors, immunity. So these are the four main functions of glycocalyx. Now the first part of this chapter is done. The next part will be discussed in next part. So guys, please like, subscribe and comment. Thank you.